Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. On today's episode, we're talking about the greatest conference on classical education that anyone has ever been to or will go to.
Oh gosh, let me think. What would that be?
The Memoria Press Teacher Training Conference.
Oh,
July, 13th through 15th?
That sounds right.
Probably next week when you're listening to this, or maybe in 2 weeks, depending on when we get it out. It's Wednesday through Friday of that week that and you should be here. But before we get there, we're going to talk all about it, where it came from, why you should come. But before we get there, Paul, what have you been reading recently?
What I've been trying to read on my lunch breaks, which are few and far between, is Coral Island by Ballantyne.
I've read that.
I've never heard of it.
Oh yeah, that's one of the great Robinson odds shipwreck stories.
Oh, those make me claustrophobic.
What? This is like
There's too much sunshine and fresh air for her.
I can't imagine being stuck someplace.
These are three boys marooned on a shipwrecked on an island, and they're just having the time of their lives. It's a wonderful.
And one of the interesting things in that book is that the sort of lead boy, he knows how to do things because he's read them in books. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. It's quite fun.
Nice.
Is it a children's book?
It is.
Paul, let me ask you a follow-up. You get marooned on an island.
Yes.
What do your first 24 hours look like?
I think
because I feel like of the four of us, if any of us got marooned on an island, you're definitely my odds-on favorite to survive. In terms of like if it was one of the rest of us.
Number one, I'm gonna find shelter or make shelter, which is what these boys do exactly what they ought to do, which is they get some shelter, they figure out what they're gonna do for food, and then little by little they start exploring to find out what else is on the island they can take advantage of.
It's like Swiss Family Robinson.
Well, Tanya, what have you been reading recently?
I'm reading a French book in translation, not in French, called Fresh Water for Flowers, or I think in other translations it's called Water for Flowers. It was the book of the year for Italy in 2021 or something. I don't know. But I'm reading it because I heard it recommended on a podcast and thought it looked interesting. It's about a woman that is the caretaker of a cemetery and all, the people that come through and it's got her personal life story and it's modern lit, which I don't read a lot of. So
far, is it good?
It is very good. Yes.
Well, I drove to Pittsburgh last week to go to ACCS. And so I had 6 hours in the car by myself, 2 ways, which was great. So I listened to East of Eden both ways. And then when I had a little bit of time in the hotel, I also read it. So I have about 5.5 hours left because it's a long one. And I think that puts me in part 4 of 6, I think. But really good. And I think one thing that makes Steinbeck particularly interesting is this is true both in Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden, but there's like the philosophizing side of him that is commenting almost in an esoteric way on the movement of people in the United States and the forces that move them. But I think he also has a knack for drama and action. Like things happen in his novels that are surprising and interesting.
And keep it moving.
And they really do. And so I've enjoyed it on that level. I think at this point, I would say that I've enjoyed Grapes of Wrath more to this point.
Well, maybe you'll get me to read Grapes of Wrath.
Have you not read it?
I have not read Grapes of Wrath.
If you liked East of Eden, you will love Grapes of Wrath, except it's very depressing.
It's really sad.
I can't say that East of Eden was really
not edifying, depressing, right?
But
I am curious though where it's going. And I think it could transcend the level of Grapes of Wrath depending on where it lands.
Goes. Yeah. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Oh. Have you read East of Eden, Martin?
Read it 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. No, I love Steinbeck. I really think he's not talked about enough in terms of an American author, and we still talk more about Hemingway and Faulkner and those. I think Steinbeck is much more American in many ways than those other authors are, and he's writing about America exclusively, and some of his minor novels too are just so pleasant to read. Tortilla Flats and Cannery Row and some of those things. And having grown up in California and been to Monterey, and there is this California, I don't know what you call it, not feeling, California dreaming. No, there is this thing about California that if you would only know if you live there, an atmosphere that can be evoked. And I think Steinbeck just totally gets it.
I agree with that.
And also Travels with Charlie, where I think 1966, he just takes off in his car and he drives all the way across the country, because by that time he's living on the East Coast, and he drives all the way across the country. And it's the stories of all the things that happen. And you get this snapshot of America at that time before everything changes. And it's just this wonderful thing. And it's funny. It's like a lot of his books, all of them have a little bit of this sort of world sorrow in them. And that has that too, particularly when he goes back, I think it's to Seattle or someplace, and it's completely changed from when he had been there. And you know, that feeling you get when you go back to find something and it's not the same anymore. And he just captures all that kind of stuff so well.
Shane, I'm curious, did you ever, sometimes when I'm driving by myself and listening, every once in a while I have to stop and do something else because it's kind of lulling me to sleep. Were you able to listen to this straight through?
You know, I did, except for I was able to power through and stay only on that. Sometimes I'm tempted to I'll just do an hour or something else, but I stayed full 6 hours on the audiobook. But on the way back on Saturday, I was trying to get home before Jack's bedtime. And I literally had a 30-minute window. If I stopped, and I was about to fall asleep 2/3 of the way through. And so I stopped and got a drink with some caffeine in it. But I still made it home in time before bedtime. So
he could have stayed up maybe a few minutes for you.
Maybe.
Or maybe not.
That schedule is strict.
I know, when you get them off, it's terrible. You keep them up late, they don't sleep later.
It's true. Martin, what have you been reading recently?
Well, a number of things. We were talking before the show about the Three Musketeers. And I commented to Paul that it in many ways, it's an ethical train wreck. And I had been able to distill that whole problem, I think, down to one word, which was French. A lot of French novels seem to be a little wild in that regard. So, and it's quite confusing. It's not like, his other novels that we've talked about here.
The Three Musketeers you find more confusing than the Count of Monte Cristo?
Oh, by far, yes. Yeah, the Count of Monte Cristo is much clearer.
The Count of Monte Cristo is at least one storyline. Is the Three Musketeers?
There's all these little diversions that are going on all the time.
There's diversions that go on.
Yeah, and
that
so
I
you're wondering,
recall.
where are we again? And who's Madam? What's her name? And why is he in love with her? And
okay, so
why is he in love with somebody else in the next chapter? And
let me ask you this. You're talking about it being an ethical dilemma of a book, but you don't feel like that about Sabatini? I mean, it's the same thing.
I think there's a morality behind Sabatini that is not there.
Well, I think you'll find the morality. I think Dumas always writes with morality.
I think so.
You're going to find it. You're going to find it.
Okay, maybe it culminates in something that makes sense of all the other things, but the ethical latitude that's given to these characters in terms of dealing with people in regard to money, dealing with people in regard to sexuality, dealing with people in regard to just honesty it's a pretty wild ride.
Get to the end. I want to know.
Okay.
I want to know.
Yeah,
at the
maybe
end.
maybe it redeems itself in the end. But yeah. And then I'm reading a couple of nonfiction books right now. Personal Knowledge by Michael Polanyi. And at the same time, I'm reading Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And I just had this, when you're reading something, particularly if you you're reading more than one book, and you come to this revelation. And I realized that what Kahneman was talking about the two systems of thinking we have. One is the immediate and intuitive, the one we use to make quick decisions. And system two, he calls where it's this more rational, analytic thing where we really dig down into something. And then I'm reading Polanyi, who's writing 60, 70 years before Kahneman is even, and he had the exact same insight, talking about subordinate thinking and focal thinking. And it turns out it's the same insight, and they're coming at it from two different directions. And it just explains a lot about how we think. And it really bears on the issue of basic skills training, and how you have to really analyze like phonics and the letter sound correspondences, and the same thing going on in arithmetic, the calculation aspect of it, and that's all part of that system 2 in Kahneman's thinking. And you have to make it a part of system 1 to make it intuitive, immediate, so that you're not thinking about it anymore, really. Because when you make intuitive decisions, you're not really thinking about them. You're just, boom, you do them, and you need to make those your arithmetical procedures. You got to make them part of that so that you can do the higher level stuff more easily.
Arithmetic first?
Arithmetic first, yeah.
Tanya, later on when people are studying Martin, his body and his life, it'll be like in linguistics.
What is this organ? I've never seen this
It'll
before.
be like in linguistics where they talk about the cognitive turn. This is Martin's cognitive turn. People would be like after he discovered Michael Polanyi and.
Oh, so.
Okay.
No, I've had too many of them to this one to make any particular.
Martin's cognitive abilities are going like this all the time.
Out here, we'll forget it next week. I mean, and I was thinking about this just the other day. You know how you will read a book, particularly a nonfiction book, which you've marked up, and you'll read and go, I don't remember any of this. And you're thinking, well, surely I marked it and I did all that. I was thinking about it. It must, no, gone.
That's
so
right.
You have to, but.
The funny thing to me is when you and I were reading the same book and we had marked totally different things. Like you and I did not mark. It would have disturbed
me if we hadn't, Tanya.
We literally had not. It was something for the schools division. It was one of those books we were reading for the schools division. And Martin would say, I've underlined this. And I would say, I haven't. And then I would say, I've underlined this. And Martin would say, that's not important.
But you know what is important that you both agree about? The teacher training conference.
Oh,
so
yes.
I want to ask you all three, where did this come from? Who had the first idea to say, you know what, like we should invite tons of people to come to our campus?
I can answer that question.
All right, let's hear it.
So 20 some years ago, we were in that old church building, that old little Catholic church building by where the warehouse is now. It's not there anymore. Martin had started the online academy. And so it was Cheryl Lowe and Brian sat beside her. And then I sat over behind them like our backs were to each other. And then Martin sat by me and he would teach his online classes. And at that point it was all like typing. There were no voices, so it wasn't too disturbing.
People don't realize how primitive that was. It was text chat.
Right. Yeah. And so whenever we needed to have a meeting, we would just flip our chairs around and sit in that little circle in the middle of our desks. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember the year Cheryl said, I want to have a teacher training conference. I want it to be different than all the other ones that I've been to, because I want this to be down to earth, practical. This is how you teach. This is how you use the curriculum. I want it to be specific to teaching and not esoteric. And so we decided we would do it, but then we didn't. So then when we got the new building at Vidito and we had a meeting in the conference room, we did it again. And she said it again, I want to have a conference. So then we were at this campus, only it was like we hadn't done any renovations. And so we were in the cafeteria, but it was not renovated at all. And so Martin was speaking. Iris Hatfield was doing a session on cursive, and she would try to show her PowerPoint. Brian was running the sound and the video. And Iris, I remember she just kept pointing the pointer in the wrong direction. Like, I guess you have to point it at the projector, but she was pointing it at the screen. And the whole time my phone was blowing up because the restrooms couldn't handle the infrastructure of having like 30 people. And so the restrooms kept overflowing. So while all of this is going on, I'm dealing with the maintenance guy trying to keep the restrooms running. I mean, it was just like 30 people, but we were exhausted. It was like doing it for the 500 that you do it for now, because we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
It was just, it was really a hot mess. I can't remember how we ate. We must have I think we brought barbecue in. I don't remember.
First couple of years I was involved, it was always Mark's and Jason's.
We just kept
we'd
going back and forth. That's right. That's right.
So what's interesting about that description, though, is all the seeds of what we do now are still there. So,
yes.
Paul, maybe describe to people listening who have not been to our teacher training conference what it is now, what people would expect when they come for those 2 days or 3 days if they come for pre-conference.
Well, you have each day one or two plenary talks, which are going to be your more general
esoteric,
philosophical kind of talks, but the majority of the day is dedicated to workshops, which, you'll have a track, which is your second grade workshop. And so a second grade teacher can come in there and they're going to go subject by subject over the course of 2 days, everything that a second grade teacher is going to be teaching. And, they'll be giving very, very down to earth tips of this is what we do for discipline, or this is how we, this is how we make sure that the penmanship is not being let go after they've learned it in kindergarten, first grade, and all that kind of thing. All the way up to high school, where you might spend once you get into upper school, it's broken down more by subject, because most schools have a teacher that specializes in math, or a teacher that specializes in classical studies or something, and you can spend 2 days, or 1 day doing literature, 1 day doing writing, or whatever it is. And you really get to spend a couple of days with a homogenous group of people that are all teaching that subject to that grade.
But our teachers are the ones presenting. So they're presenting what they do in their classrooms.
Right.
But then you've got, 15 other people in the room that are either all about to teach or have taught that as well. And so at this point, like early on, it very much was everybody just listening to the one teacher that teaches at Highlands presenting. And now you will get a lot of good feedback from the other teachers saying, well, this is what I had to do at my school to help, my students do it. And you get actually a lot of great crowdsourcing ideas, that build on top of that.
At the beginning, we didn't really have, we were training our teachers too, what it needed to be. And so they would attend. There weren't near as many of them, but Cheryl would stand up there and talk about every single subject. So it really was the same. Like she would go subject to subject to subject and talk about, this is how this is taught. This is why we teach the way we do. This is our philosophy about this subject. She was like a one-woman show. But now we have loads of master teachers who can provide that help. And you didn't talk about the Wednesday.
I did not.
And the difference.
Yeah. How did Wednesday come about? And then tell me what it is.
Well, there was the need for, so if you're trying to compress a year's worth of material effectively and how to teach it down into 2 days, you may only have an hour for Latin, right? And so there were certain subjects that we realized the teachers need a day to really just go through the content of that subject for that grade. And so we started offering, a whole day in Latina Christiana. And so that day is dedicated to going over very quickly the content that the whole year's worth of content they're going to teach. So they have the big overview, so that not only are they going to get how they teach it in the 2 days of the conference, but they've been given the content on that Wednesday. And so over the years, we've offered more and more things on that Wednesday, which are content driven rather than
like Latin, classical composition, the things that are harder.
Sure. So Martin, there are several other classical conferences now, and I've just been at 2 of them in the last 2 weeks. And you can see the growth of the movement by just being at these conferences where they have 1,000, 1,500 people at them representing many, many schools. Where does the Memoria Press teacher training fit in? And what do you think makes our teacher training conference important or valuable for schools?
Well, I'm not, and I love many of those conferences, but there's so much going on, and there are a lot of different opinions in terms of how to do things, and I think for some people that can be a little confusing. Here, there is a central pedagogical philosophy, and there is a pretty well organized approach to what we're doing and why we're doing it. I mean, I think we in one sense we cover the bases. In another sense, it's all consistent. We've put a lot of work, Tanya in particular, into making this curriculum that we have coherent and making it so that every part reflects something of the whole we're trying to get to. And so I think that comes across in our conference, that this whole philosophy of education that undergirds what we do and how that works itself out very concretely in how you teach it.
So, Martin, you've been doing these conferences for a long time, specifically ours, years and years and years.
Okay, I think you could stop there.
What do you have any like memorable moments or funny things that happened or enjoyable things about the conference that I'm looking for a story here from the conference, and not that you remember anything, but I'm just hoping that something stands out to you.
Well, we're just always glad when he shows up for his plenaries.
Yeah.
Wait,
Well,
did you actually miss a plenary once? Or
No, but he's cut it close.
I mean, I would have a lot to say on that, Shane, and it would be helpful to the show, but I just can't remember anything.
I think that actually does raise a good point. That at the end of the week, we are so exhausted. It's hard to actually remember what happens during these weeks.
They are quite a blur.
Well,
they are quite a blur.
I mean, it is interesting over those many, many years, which I don't remember, that just the growth of the classical education movement has just been astounding. And I tell people, I just told somebody about that earlier today. I can hardly remember that. Just how amazing it is that this movement is the one that is the only thing in education that's growing. I mean, charter schools as a kind of school, that's growing because of all the privatization that's really happening now as a result of COVID. But in terms of how you do education, classical education is the only thing with any energy in it. And so you see that in the movement. There's just a lot of people. There's people outside the movement who are noticing the movement. And when you go there and there's exhibit booths and all that, you see people who you're wondering, gosh, even they're here now. And you just didn't see that years and years ago.
I have a story.
All right, let's hear it. This is what I was waiting for.
Can we move along
No,
now?
it's a good one. You'll remember this. So one year, Cheryl decided she was going to do a plenary on, and you may have been here, on the 10 reasons.
Oh, yes.
The 10 reasons for studying the pagan classics. And so she was writing it, for days. And then she came up to me one day. She came up to my desk and she said, okay, I read this aloud to myself last night and it took 2.5 hours. And I said, well, okay, you have 45 minutes. So you're going to need to cut. So off she went. So the next day she came back and she said, okay, I've cut it. It's down to 1.5 hours. I said, nope, you have 45 minutes. Back to the drawing board. Never heard another thing about it. She gets up there. She gets to point number 3. It's been an hour. Somebody speaking after her. It may have been Jim Selby, but she was going way into their time. So Martin keeps going back and forth. So Brian's back in the back running the camera. And Martin's like, is she going to stop? And I'm like, well, she's got 7 more points.
No, as I recall it, I'm in the kitchen on the side of where Cheryl's speaking. And I had
And you're the
I was
MC.
the one.
You're the
I
one
was the one who was running the conferences early on when they were really, really well run.
Oh yeah.
You all probably don't remember that,
Right.
But
We definitely don't.
We definitely don't remember that.
But I would always, because this is not uncommon for speakers to do this. It's just that hers was going along.
It's going to go.
And so you just have to sit there and calculate. Okay, I can shave some time off here, and I can shave some time off here. And you come into the kitchen, she's going way too long. Brian said, "Stop her."
Yeah, Brian put Martin in charge of stopping her.
So But
so she got 3 done, and Martin went up and stopped her. So then we get all these complaints from people after the conference was over because they wanted to know her other 7 points.
Right.
And we had cut her off. It was like we were to blame. We'd still be there now.
Well,
but hold on. There's another ending to this story. I was actually just on our website looking through articles that Cheryl wrote, and we turned that into a 10 article series.
That's right.
In the classical teacher that lasted 2.5 years.
It did. It went on forever.
And I think that's when we decided we were never going to run a series like that again.
That was so that's my story. I'm sure there are other Martin stories.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
I'm
I'm going to give you all a story this year because I'm talking about the 8 goals of classical education. And I don't care if it takes me an hour to get through 2 goals. I'm finishing all 8. You're going to have to drag me off the stage.
No, you're not. Because, yes, you're the one in charge. So who's going to drag you off the stage?
That's right.
That would be Martin and I. We will each go grab an elbow and haul you off.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a really fun time.
You think?
And I've enjoyed this conversation. Anyone who's listening, you should sign up. If you can't come personally, we are doing it virtually, so you can sign up virtually.
And I think we should say this is also for homeschoolers. You know, the homeschoolers are welcome to come to the teacher training part. Obviously, they have their own on Monday, Tuesday, which is dedicated directly to them in every way. But really, Wednesday through Friday, the content workshops could be helpful to them also, and would be. Even though they're classroom oriented, it's still the same content taught in the same way.
Absolutely. So I hope to see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Etc. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking this video. If you want to join the conversation, then you can comment below. And if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our channel. I hope you enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time.